Welcome back to Block TV. It's time for HODL with HEDL, a chance to zoom out for a moment and take a wider perspective on some of the heady issues that dominate the crypto markets as a whole. And to guide us on this journey of discovery, we're joined by early Bitcoiner and thought leader, Dan Held. Dan, thank you so much for joining us. And as of last week, Director of Business Development at Kraken. Congratulations. Well,
thanks.
Yeah, good to have you here with us. Well, last time we had you on, the news just broke that LedgerX was launching the physical Bitcoin-backed futures, but then since then the FTC shut that down, reeled down, announcing they gave no such approval, causing LedgerX to look pretty bad in the process. Now, what has been the outcome of that, both for LedgerX and for the crypto sphere as a whole?
Yeah, I think largely there's a lot of issues around regulation in the crypto sphere where different entrepreneurs are looking for guidance, whether that be from the IRS or FinCEN or the CFTC or the SEC. And unfortunately, a lot of them have been met with very little guidance. And so they attempt to do their best job at building products and services around this sort of rough framework. But sometimes, with that limited guidance, entrepreneurs have to go give it a shot. And sometimes the regulators come back and say, that's not good enough, or actually we disagree, which is unfortunate because these are entrepreneurial endeavors and these entrepreneurs are spending a lot of time and money to go build things. And it'd be nice if they had just a little bit more clear guidance as to what, is going to be allowed or thumbs up approval on what to do. I mean, even still, it's very confusing tax-wise for a lot of cryptocurrency users. So, there's a lot of regulatory issues to where it's kind of stunting growth in the crypto space as a whole. There's not a lot of incentive for regulators to give a thumbs up or a green light some of these projects because they could be perceived as being very risky.
Mm-hmm. And so you view this more as a bump in the road for LedgerX and, let's move forward some here and regroup? Or do you see it as more of having, maybe let's say pissing off the regulators down, looking forwards?
LedgerX has been working with regulators for over 5 years. I met Juthika Chow at a conference in New York in 2014. So I know they've been working closely with regulators. I don't think this will be a big misstep for them. I think they've been kind of heads down going for this goal of being regulated. So for them, I think they'll see it more as a speed bump rather than a roadblock.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, switching gears a little bit, the price of Bitcoin shot up, yesterday and this morning to almost 13K, but then has settled down a bit since then, fallen around 12, a little less. And many are pointing to the trade and currency war currently going on with China. What connection do you see there between the two?
Yeah, so Bitcoin fundamentally was built to be a risk-off trade or a safe haven asset. And so as we've seen gold and treasury bills, as we've seen these other safe haven assets move up in price during the currency war or the trade war that kind of became a currency war, as we've seen that happen, Bitcoin as well has moved up in parallel. So Bitcoin is being perceived as that risk-off trade. As I mentioned before on my show, it's hard to perceive Bitcoin as a risk-off trade, but the characteristics it has as a store of value give it that risk-off or that safe haven asset properties. Mm-hmm. So we're seeing essentially fear being manifested in the market, fear around trade between China and the U.S., fear around China's debts. China's dollar-denominated debts will continue to increase and be harder and harder to pay off. And there's at least $800 billion of U.S. dollar-denominated debts in China. If China's currency keeps getting devalued over time, those debts will become harder and harder to pay off, which could lead to a financial crisis.
Mm-hmm. And that definitely, like you mentioned, that's showing the Bitcoin store value there. But do you think that also with the tariffs and the different restrictions on trade itself, do you see that Bitcoin could possibly use this opportunity to grow as well as a peer-to-peer network, possibly for circumventing these regulatory bottlenecks and these tariff bottlenecks between countries?
That's an interesting question. You'd be able to circumvent digital goods and services. So a payment for a digital good or service would be able to be done with Bitcoin that would circumvent these tariffs or at least allow people to get around those. But I'm not sure what percentage of trade is done digitally versus physically, because physically you'd still have the problem of physically importing or exporting the item.
Right. I know there's been various reports about, especially in China and with Hong Kong, because mainland China, they're a little tough there when it comes to Bitcoin and crypto. But there's been major reports of people going outside the borders to Russia. There's major Russian, let's say gray markets for physically exchanging whether fiat, whether dollars or yuan for Bitcoin. Do you foresee that happening here, or is this, is it too big of a sea, literally and figuratively, between the U.S. and China for that to take place here?
I mean, all humans intuitively want to preserve their wealth. Their wealth is their entire life's work. It's their time and energy that they spent. It's waking up at 6 a.m., hopping in the shower, getting out of the shower, taking an hour commute, and then doing backbreaking labor all day. These people have worked super hard for this money, and they're going to, any human across the world will choose to preserve that money rather than let it be devalued. And so Bitcoin represents a unique opportunity to get your money out of a situation like that, where a company or a country can penalize you forever on your aggregate life savings or your aggregate life work. So Bitcoin, I think, intuitively touches upon what all humans want, which is freedom and control over your money. And I think we'll see people from Hong Kong and China both choose Bitcoin increasingly as a way to get their money out of a bad financial situation.
Mm-hmm. And that's been a big talk about one of the reasons for the price jump. Another suggested reason is that the Fed recently cut interest rates. How much do you see of that as a factor in the price jump?
Yeah, the Fed cutting rates during a bull market was sort of not unprecedented. Well, it was unprecedented, but certainly a kind of a symptom of the money printing times is the way to put it. The Fed and every other country in the world has said, we're going to start the printing presses, even during the good times, when technically their mandate is to help during the bad times. Now we're seeing Trump and other political leaders weigh in on their central bankers, who are supposed to be apolitical, and use them to juice the economy when the economy doesn't really need fixing right now. The economy just needs to run by itself. But we're seeing them coming in and printing money to keep the good times rolling, to make sure everything looks good during their political career. And so this is a symptom of the times. I couldn't imagine a better backdrop for Bitcoin, with turmoil between countries, each country printing as much money as they felt was okay. I mean, in conjunction with the Fed, the U.S. is about to have $1 trillion deficits annually, which Jerome Powell, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, said the U.S. will lose its status as the world reserve currency if fiscal policies don't change. And that's fucking crazy. The chairman of the Federal Reserve said that 2 weeks ago. So we are in unprecedented times, and this is why Bitcoin was created, is we don't have to worry about how to interpret Jerome Powell's facial expressions when he talks about interest rates. Mm-hmm. We can just look at the Bitcoin protocol and see exactly how many Bitcoins will be printed, which is 21 million over X amount of time, or until the year approximately 2140.
Yeah, speaking about unprecedented times, I saw a tweet by President Trump where he specifically called out the Federal Reserve in public, saying, look at China's, currency manipulation, you guys better do something. Two things really scare me there. One is that the Federal Reserve is supposed to be apolitical, supposed to be independent of the White House and the sitting government. That's one. And two, on the other side, as well, is that President Trump's really kind of push for, hey, China's manipulating money, we should do it also, which gotta scare fiat holders.
Welcome to the circus.
Exactly.
Go ahead, print as much as you'd like. Like I said before, the temptation for, like I've said before on HODL with HEDL, the temptation to print money is irresistible by humans. And so we're just seeing that manifested in much more real time and much faster than I anticipated, which is fine, because it just means that it'll hasten Bitcoin's adoption as people, Bitcoin's a really hard thing to sell. You can't sell uncertainty in the financial market to someone if they've never felt that, or if they haven't felt that in 9 years. We've had a great bull run here since the last 2008 financial crisis, and there's a lot of people who forgot how bad it was. And it's hard to sell Bitcoin, or hard to sell why Bitcoin's valuable, during that bull run, during the good times, it's much easier to sell Bitcoin, or much easier to sell the Bitcoin story when you go, hey, look at what your government's doing. And they're like, citizens around the world go, wow, this is pretty bad. And you're like, well, that's why Bitcoin was made.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you definitely see those real world use cases in countries like Venezuela, in countries where the money kind of has been inflated to the point of little or no value. That's you see that use case right there. Switching gears, talking about the health of Bitcoin, the Ethereum Bitcoin pairing has gone below 0.02. Bitcoin dominance is up to almost 70%. What effect do you see this having on the market? This strong domination by Bitcoin.
I think we're seeing a continued flight to quality. Bitcoin is the de facto gold in the space, and digital gold to the rest of the world. Bitcoin's fundamentals have never been stronger. We're seeing a lot of people, I think, grow increasingly skeptical of other protocols' promises. I think there are interesting ideas out there, but we haven't really seen a lot of action. We haven't seen a lot of traction develop. So I think we're seeing that reflected in the price of altcoins relative to Bitcoin. And most of the altcoin pairs, whether that be ETH BTC, Zcash BTC, Bcash BTC, you go down the list, and a lot of them are hitting historical lows or all-time lows. So I think that largely reflects that people are, as I wrote in my article, Quantum Narratives, people are increasingly, looking at this space with a rational perspective and going, okay, you wanted to go achieve this, have you done that? And some may show inklings of that, but overall I think there's a lot of promises that haven't been met. And I think that's why, for instance, with Ethereum, I think that's why we're seeing kind of a pivot of the Ethereum community. They're pivoting from the world computer or DApp narrative, and they're pivoting to store of value, because they're trying to find a narrative that sticks. They're trying to find a narrative that people will rally around. And when people rally around that narrative, the price will recover. But until then, there is no story, I think, that they can tell, that they can spin right now, that's really going to change the tide there. And if Bitcoin keeps surging in price, really a lot of the new, people go, well, the newbies don't really care about fundamentals. They just come in for the pump and dumps, right? But the newbies came in, and if Bitcoin's the one that's pumping, then that's what they're going to buy. So that further reinforces Bitcoin's narrative and further reinforces its price. So until a new narrative forms, or until a stronger narrative forms for these other cryptocurrencies, or we see some real world usage, those two events are necessary before we see that tide turn with the altcoin Bitcoin pairs.
Mm-hmm. I mean, listen, like you said, if Bitcoin is the digital gold, but that there still are other precious metals out there that are traded, that are used. Listen, Bitcoin definitely has that store of value. Are you saying that there just simply hasn't been, an altcoin that has a good enough use case, not to take over Bitcoin and not to replace it for its use, but do you see room for a specific use case altcoin that might pop up, whether it exists or not in the future?
I think ones like Monero and Zcash are really interesting, due to their privacy functionality. However, we saw with Zcash that, like everything else with Bitcoin, like everything else with any other cryptocurrency, there were a lot of trade-offs. If you have perfect privacy on layer one, there could be an inflation bug, which is what happened with Zcash. That's really, really risky, because that would undermine the monetary policy of the cryptocurrency, which is a really, really important part of the security and perception over its value. So, I think Bitcoin over the long term will absorb new privacy features that will make it competitive with these privacy coins. But that's an example of a feature that I think is really unique to other coins right now that Bitcoin might import at a later date. With Schnorr signatures and CoinJoin, that gives pretty good privacy on layer one, and Lightning gives you pretty good privacy on layer two. So yes, I do think there are other use cases. I think, can you still be competitive if it's a form of money or a form of a store of value? Like, for example, Litecoin, has faster confirmation times, but that's not necessarily true, because you just have less of a thermodynamic guarantee that the transaction won't be reversed. What that means is that there's not as much proof of work being put into each block for Lightning, so it takes more blocks to have the same confidence as Bitcoin. So I think we're going to see the very analogous coins to Bitcoin, like Dogecoin or Litecoin, increasingly have issues with their narrative, as most people will defer to kind of Bitcoin for the traditional money side of things. Same with Zcash and Monero. As Bitcoin kind of absorbs some of those privacy features, it'll be hard for them to compete narrative-wise. And Brandon Quittem wrote a really cool article about how Bitcoin is a mycelium, or like a kind of like a fungus. And mycelium can actually do horizontal gene transfer, which means that they can take the genetic code of other organisms and ingest that into their own. And that's what Bitcoin can do as well. So to outcompete Bitcoin, you have to kind of outcompete it absorbing your genetic code or your narrative or your use case.
Mm-hmm. And of course, because it's decentralized, a majority of the network has to agree to that genetic morphing and mutation as well. And if you look at the prices, you mentioned also Litecoin. There was big hype running up to the halving. Since then, kind of a bust, hasn't really jumped there. But like you said, the future, it's looking bright for Bitcoin. All the other coins are down right now. Thank you, Dan, for joining us very much. We'll definitely stay on top of the action, our finger on the pulse. And for all you at home, I'm Yona Hockhauser. Thanks for watching.
For more news and updates, follow us on Twitter.